I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Okay, part 2 on a blog that I did last week on the golden rules of real estate, retiring early, retiring comfortably, and investing. I wanted to cover a few more topics that I didn't go through on the last video here and address some of the questions that I get on my YouTube blog. This is important stuff, and I like to, kind of reaffirm or touch on this stuff at least once a year. It saves me the time of having to comment endlessly about a lot of the same questions that I get on my YouTube channel here and through Twitter. And it's one of the reasons, again, I'm going to plug my book here again, my Along for the Ride. It's available on Amazon. It's not a moneymaker for me. It's a door opener. It's a business card. It's an introduction to how I think, how I've become, self-sufficient at a young age, could have retired many years ago. I continue on as a realtor. A lot of people might not realize this because I enjoy the work. I love the challenge. But this is something that I could have retired at a decade ago and still led a comfortable life. I enjoy the challenges in getting up every morning and working and getting better. And you can too. If you start at the right age, start putting your money away, getting it working for you, then life becomes pretty sweet by the time you're in your 40s. Now you don't have to get up every day and work a paycheck. You've got a lot more time, if you so choose, to do what you want to do. And that's what I've always said and what I talk about in my book. Money is not everything. Money doesn't mean a whole lot to me. Material possessions don't mean a lot to me either. Even though I've got a nice lifestyle, I drive a nice car, I've got a nice place, but they were never at the top of my priority list ever, and they're still not. I'm really basically a minimalist in a lot of ways. But what money does do, and I talk about in my book, money buys you time. That's what will buy you happiness, where you don't have to get up and work in a job you aren't all that enthused about. You've got time to do things that you enjoy. And that's what money will do for you. It will buy you time and freedom. Now, a question I get a lot, and I continuously are always asking, people are asking me, what are the steps to financial security? What are the steps that I should be looking at or doing? So first and foremost, I've always said, step number one, priority number one, in my opinion, especially if you're living in a city like Vancouver, is to buy your principal residence. I've talked about this so many times. Start saving for the down payment as soon as you start making a paycheck. Start putting aside 10, 15, 20. I've got clients that have saved 40 and 50% living at home for the first 3 or 4 years, really making some sacrifices so that they don't have to live at home very long. And after 3 or 4 years, they've got $100,000 to buy a $600,000 Yale Town condo. It can be done. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to make some sacrifices. But I'm under the belief as soon as you start earning a paycheck, you should start putting some money aside for the down payment. And remember, the big hurdle to getting into the Vancouver market is getting that damn down payment. That 60, 70, 80, depending on what you're buying. I mean, you can buy good older wood frames in Richmond or Burnaby or New Westminster for $350K on SkyTrain. So you can get in with 10% down. Let's call it $35,000. Or if you want to buy downtown, you might need more like $60,000, $70,000. Whatever your goals are. But the sooner you start, the better off you're going to be. Once you've got that down payment and you're able to get into the market, you have crossed a huge, huge hurdle in your life. Because the cost to hold that condo that you now own isn't a lot more than what it is to rent. So do the math on it. That should be priority number one. Priority number two after that, as I always recommend to people, is start maxing out your TFSA and your RRSP. If you buy my book, I'll go into detail about which should come first. It all depends on your income. If you're earning less than $50,000 a year, can only do one or the other, you're probably best to be putting your money into a TFSA. Once you start earning 60, 70, 80 grand or more, you're getting into a higher tax bracket, you're probably best to be putting more money into the RRSP to get the tax deduction. But you really want to start doing some serious damage to both after you've bought your principal residence. And you should be investing it in just simple low-cost ETFs that track the broad index, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, the TSX. I'm under the belief that your first $200,000 or $300,000 in retirement funds should just go straight into an index fund. After that, if you want to get a little bit more aggressive and you enjoy this type of thing, then for sure, you can start buying some good quality individual stocks if you want to put the work in, because it's some work. And yes, the fees on those will be pretty much zero when you're buying individual stock, $10 a trade, and you are definitely going to be creating a lot better yield. You know, the S&P 500 right now is yielding maybe 1.7%. You can buy Bell Canada, you can buy TELUS, the Canadian banks that are yielding well in excess of 4.5%. So a much better yield. But start with an index fund. After that, after you've got a good handle, you bought your principal residence, you've got a good handle on your retirement funds through your RRSP and your TFSA, then you can look at possibly buying an investment unit. It's the third and final step. You don't buy an investment unit before you buy your principal residence, and I wouldn't recommend buying an investment unit until you've got a good handle on retirement savings. Then, once you've got those two taken care of, for sure, give me a call. You're going to need another $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 down. You're going to need 20% conventional mortgage to buy an investment property. Buy a good one bedroom or a studio, depending on what your budget is in downtown Vancouver or Richmond or New West, whatever your budget is. Put a tenant in it and keep it for 20 or 25 years. Let the tenant pay down the mortgage and then have a look at it, and you will do very well. It's all about diversifying. You don't want all your eggs in one basket. Principal residence, it's doing double duty. It's giving you not only shelter, but it'll also be an incredible investment over 20 or 30 or 40 years. Plus, all the growth grows tax-free. It's the best tax shelter we get with the principal resident exemption. Take advantage of it. RRSP, you get the tax deduction on the contribution. It's incredible. Plus, it's tax-free growth until you cash it out. TFSA, you don't get the tax deduction, but all that money will grow tax-free. And when you pull it out, it'll all come out tax-free, which is incredible. The only downside to the TFSA is you're limited. Was $5,000, now it's $55,000. Maybe next year they'll allow us $6,000. So you're limited on what you can put in there. The investment property is that third and final step. It's about diversifying, having multiple sources of income. That's the other thing I talk about in my book, what separates successful people, entrepreneurs, multimillionaires from the guy who's struggling. Most successful people have multiple sources of income. I've had multiple sources of income since I was a teenager. I had paper routes. I worked at the golf course. I had some stocks that I was investing in. Today, I probably have 8 or 9 revenue streams. The big ones for me, of course, are my job as a realtor. That's my biggest income source. I have my real estate portfolio. I have an extensive stock portfolio that pays me pretty much every week. I'm getting a dividend check. I have other investments that I've made into various things. I've got my YouTube channel. I've got my book sales. I've got all kinds of things. Try and get multiple revenue streams. Diversify your income sources. It's a huge plus. The other thing I'll point out is a lot of people will ask me about specific things, about taxes and where to invest and what to buy and this and that. I can't dole out a lot of this. Buy my book and it'll give you the basics, the portfolio I hold, and buying good dividend paying and indexed ETFs. A couple of good sources. I always recommend to people to go to a site called Canadian Couch Potato. I recommend it in the back of my book, CanadianCouchPotato.com. That site will give you everything you need as a Canadian on how to invest in low-cost ETFs, where to put those ETFs for tax purposes, and how you're taxed on the various types of ETFs, whether it's a US, an international, or a Canadian ETF. They will give you everything you need, but you're going to have to spend 20, 30, 40 hours. Put the time in, but it'll be worth it. You can't get this stuff spoon-fed to you. You've got to put in the time. And that is a fantastic site that you could spend a year probably on, an hour or two a day for a year and still not get through. But it is well worth it. The alternative is to pay someone to manage your portfolio. And they're going to charge you 1 or 1.5%, and they're probably not even going to beat the index you're invested in. So that could cost you several $100,000 over the course of 30 or 40 years, which is how long it's going to be that you're saving for retirement. I think that 200 grand is well worth putting in 5 hours a week or 10 hours a month learning some of this stuff. Start with my book. Go to a site called Canadian Couch Potato. Another good site is seekingalpha.com. If you want to start getting into good dividend paying stock, it's an incredible resource site for learning about companies, getting comments, feedback from other investors on those companies, news on the companies you hold. Seeking Alpha is another fantastic site. But again, you got to put the time in, but it's well worth it. Learn some of this stuff. I always use the analogy in my book of a UFC fighter. A UFC fighter is disciplined or has a background in many disciplines: jiu-jitsu, boxing, wrestling. You should be the same with your life. You should learn a little bit about investing in stocks, where to hold the stocks, TFSAs, how they're taxed, indexed investing. You don't need to be an expert. Just learn the basics. Learn a little bit about real estate, the advantages of buying your principal residence, the advantages of using leverage in buying an investment property. My book would be a good source. My video blog would be a good source for that. One of the things that I think is one of the best sections in my book, and I know a lot of you people, my viewers, have read my book, is my chapter called The Ghost Ship to Wealth. And that took me about 4 months to write that chapter with my co-writer in New York. And I call it The Ghost Ship to Wealth because you buy, and I give you an example of a client that I represented in buying a condo downtown here on Pender Street. We bought the condo, put 20% down, put a tenant in it. And I use the analogy as like a ghost ship. You set it out to sea and let time and compounding do all its magic. Let that tenant pay down most of your expenses. The incredible thing with real estate as well, especially with investment properties or even your principal residence, and why I've told people many times to go to a site called calculator.net. And this is something that I find so many people, their eyes glaze over about what I'm going to tell them here. The nice thing about calculator.net, go to the mortgage calculator in there, and it's fantastic. You can plug in the amount you want to borrow, the interest rate, you can goof around with the numbers. But the nice thing is it will give you a 25-year chart of your principal to interest payment. And fool around with that with different numbers. Plug in 5% or 6% interest. Then plug in today's rate at 2.95 and see what it does to your principal versus interest payment. The nice thing about owning a home, whether it's a principal residence or an investment property, is as you start paying down that mortgage, or as your tenant starts paying it down if it's an investment property, every year you start chipping off a little bit more off the principal and a little less in interest. Back when I started, when interest rates were 15%, for every $1,000 I was putting into my mortgage, whether it was a principal payment or an investment property, 900 of that was going to interest. Now that the script is completely flipped. Now for every 1,000 you're probably chipping off 700 off principal and 300 to interest. But have a look at what it does after 10 years. After 10 years, you're doing some serious damage to the principal and paying much less in interest. After 15 years, even more. And that's something that people that talk about cash flow should realize as well. They're always talking about you can't cash flow these properties. Well, I've said many times, Vancouver real estate isn't really about cash flow, it's about capital gains, letting your tenant do the heavy lifting. But after 15 years, you will start to generate cash flow on that property because you're paying far less in interest now, and more interest, or more of that payment is going to pay off the principal. So these are just little things that you want to develop. Again, think of yourself like an MMA fighter. You want a background in all this stuff, how mortgages and how amortization tables work, how index investing works, how stocks and dividends and the payout ratio affect your returns. Learn about buying a home and the principal residence and what leverage can do for you. This is all in my book here, and it will give you a fantastic head start. You don't have to become an expert in all these things. But if you know a little bit about this, now you're lethal. You're like that MMA fighter. You've got multiple disciplines here. And that's what I try and impart in my book here. As you guys know that have read it, I've got a whole chapter on that analogy and my ghost ship to wealth and learning this stuff. It doesn't take that much time, and it will pay massive dividends for you when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, as opposed to having someone else do it for you, charging you an arm and a leg, and probably not even be able to match the returns you'll get in a good index fund. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.